Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about Wes Craven's 1988 horror movie, The Serpent and the Rainbow. During a trip to the Amazon, botanist and anthropologist Dennis Allen experiments with local herbs and medicines, which cause him to experience strange, foreboding visions. After returning to the United States, Allen is approached by a pharmaceutical company who want him to undertake a new research project. Specifically, they want him to go to Haiti to investigate the so-called zombie powder. The company believe the formula can be developed into and then profitably exploited as a super powerful anesthetic. So, even though Haiti is in the midst of a revolution, Alan takes the job. Once in Haiti, he teams up with a local doctor who, in true cinematic fashion, just happens to be an extremely attractive woman. Surprise, surprise! To begin his investigation. This is not going to be an easy job, though, particularly as the authorities don't seem to want outsiders poking around the place. The local head of Haiti's notoriously brutal secret police, Captain D'Argent Petrard, takes Alan into custody and warns him to leave the country. Alan doesn't listen to this warning, despite, or perhaps because of, the fact that the captain looks exactly like the man from his ominous visions. Of course, the brutal secret police aren't going to take that kind of defiance lying down, and they're not the kind of people to merely issue a second warning. Alan's decision to stay has most certainly put his life in danger. But he does at least know he's taking that risk. What he doesn't yet realise is that he's also risking his very soul. So apparently, when famed horror director Wes Craven was approached about doing this film, he was very excited by what he saw as an opportunity to reach a more adult audience than his usual one. The production itself would prove to be a challenging one, with cast and crew battling illnesses brought on by the poor hygiene conditions in Haiti and resorting to hiring a local militia for security. Eventually, the deteriorating political situation in the country made the safety concerns so profound that the film actually relocated production to the Dominican Republic. Now, Craven also shot a lot of footage that didn't make it into the final film. His original cut of the movie apparently ran slightly over 3 hours. He trimmed this down by nearly half for the theatrical release. And critical reception to the final movie proved mixed to positive, and it did okay financially too, with a box office of in the US of roughly double the production budget, which is kind of normally where you're getting break-even territory. On the other hand, I didn't like it, so let's talk about why. So the film's lead role is played by Bill Pullman. Now, Pullman has carved out a pretty successful screen and stage career, but he's never been someone I found especially compelling as an actor. Affable and handsome enough, I guess, but not particularly memorable. And to me, in this film, which is one of his earliest on screen roles, Pullman feels out of his comfort zone and out of his depth. I never warmed to his Dennis Allen as a person. In fact, I found him quite easy to dislike, and I never really felt convinced that the character had authentic emotions. I didn't feel like he was truly scared in what should be terrifying situations. I never felt like his dogged pursuit of the zombie powder, in which he perseveres despite not just the risk of awful things happening to him, but the reality that some of those things actually have already happened. I don't think that was ever justified by much more than, well, the script says I'm going to keep doing it, so I will. And I was also utterly unconvinced by the inevitable romantic subplot he has with the movie's only significant female character, Dr. Marielle Duchamp. So yeah, I think this young Bill Pullman wasn't the right man for the job. He's far from the only issue I had with the film, however. Because this is a film with several flaws, most of which can be summed up in 4 words. The writing is bad. And it's bad on several levels. Firstly, from a simple technical perspective, the film employs quite a bit of narration to explain events. Voiceover narration can be used effectively if it's done with care and consideration and a prior plan. For instance, whatever its other flaws, and they were many, the TV show Dexter made great use of sharing its title character's inner monologue as narration. Alas, there is no sign of that care and consideration here. It feels very much like the narration was wedged in at the last minute to paper over gaps in the plot from cutting so much of the footage that they had recorded. I mean, I can't think of any good reason to have the protagonist of a horror film deliver past tense narration, which is what happens here. Talk about undercutting the tension of whether or not they'll survive this scene. They kind of have to. They're talking about it like it already happened. The second issue with the script is that Dennis Allen is, frankly, not a very likable person. Perhaps that's why Pullman got the nod to play him, in fact. He does have an affable, genial quality to many of his roles. Perhaps they hoped this would compensate. As far as I'm concerned, it did not. The third issue with the writing is that Dallas Allen doesn't actually do much. He's very persistent in trying to fulfill his assignment, it's true, but pretty much every actual story advancement is due to the actions of some other character. And then in the finale, the script contorts itself into knots in order to let Allen be the hero. I was thoroughly underwhelmed. And then there's the biggest failure of all, at least for a horror movie, which is that it's simply not very scary. Now, in the interest of being fair, I'll acknowledge that it does have a few decent horror moments. There's one scene early on that's a little skin crawly as it involves being buried alive, another later with a spider crawling on Alan's face while he's paralysed. But these are two brief sequences, and frankly, they're rather prosaic. I mean, a big furry spider's on your face is not exactly an inventive or especially interesting way to make your audience feel creeped out, and it has nothing much to do with the voodoo themes of the movie. Those voodoo elements, meanwhile, aren't just not scary, they're actively ineffectual. Sure, the bad guy apparently has a lot of kooky voodoo powers, but they never actually seem to help him. In fact, they ultimately seem utterly counterproductive. The villain would have been much more successful if he'd just been a thug with a gun. So yeah, this was, to me, a very disappointing effort from director Wes Craven, of whom I generally expect better things. Next time, well, next Friday is Halloween, so there was really only one option for what movie I was going to talk about. What else but John Carpenter's seminal 1978 hit? But that is next time. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you've seen The Serpent and the Rainbow, let me know what you thought of it.